Turnarounds. How do we get from this to this? Or this? Find out in this video. When it comes to turnarounds, you have almost endless options. I'd recommend starting with a simple blues turnaround that navigates between the 1, the 4, back to the 1 and then the 5. So let's do this in the key of C. We'll start with open position chords. We're going to go C, F, C, G7. And we're dealing with a 2-bar turnaround, so we've got 2 beats on each chord essentially. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure you're comfortable thinking of those as the 1, the 4, the 1 and the 5 in the key of C. Now let's start to gradually evolve this progression until it becomes almost unrecognizable. Let's add a secondary dominant, a chord that's going to help us get from the 1 to the 4. So we're thinking C is 1. We're going to then turn that into a dominant 7th, making it the 5 of the 4. Now we're on the 4. To get back to the 1, we're going to go 4 minor, F minor, back to the 1. And then we're still going to have the 5 chord, G7 at the end of that. One of the first lessons I did on YouTube covers in depth this idea of adding the 5 of an oncoming chord, a secondary dominant. I'd recommend checking it out. I'll put a link in the description to that. As a quick summary, just be aware that if we're in the key of C, truthfully there's only one dominant chord and it's the 5th, that would be the G7. Any other dominant chord in the sequence is what we'd call a secondary dominant. Now our next variation on that progression is going to incorporate a diminished chord. We're going to take the 1, C7, that's the 5 of 4, to the 4. Now instead of 4 minor, sharp 4 diminished. So F sharp diminished 7th, leading back to the 1. But I've gone for the 5th in the bass, so we're creating this nice bass run, F, F sharp, G. If we want to take that chromatic bass idea even further, we could put the E in the bass on the C7 chord. That would be the major third of the chord. Now you've got this. So you get that full bass run, E, F, F sharp, G. Now for the next step we're going to use some 3-note voicings. Again, do check out that link in the description. I went into a lot of detail on these things in a prior video. Okay, so the C major, let's put the 5th in the bass. So you've got your 5th, the 3rd and the root. Then we make that a dominant 7. And then we go to F, then F minor, then back to C, G7. These kinds of voicings sound especially good for playing jazz and swing. Now we're going to invert those voicings. C, C7, F. We could go F minor simply by dropping the 3rd. We're going to do that, but also add the 6th. So we get that really beautiful F minor 6. And then G7, we can put flat 7 in on the B string. And again, for playing jazz and swing music, those voicings are invaluable. If I use both of them in a row, it sounds something like this. Now before we get onto the jazzy stuff, let's have a look at some more blues flavoured turnarounds. Let's start with this turnaround you've probably heard a million times. Let's figure out what's really happening there. Okay, so this is C7. This is C diminished. This is F minor 6. And this is back to C. As a basic chord progression, that would sound something like this. Now let's look at other ways that we could voice that progression. Let's take a C7 here. C diminished, F minor 6, back to the C. Now of course turnarounds are cyclical in nature. You can just go to the 5, the G7, if you'd like to go around them again. For these examples I'm just going to resolve them all back onto the C chord. Okay, what about off the top 4 strings? Top 3 strings. Now some that are slightly tricky to grab on this guitar. If you've got a cutaway or if we're in another key, wouldn't be too bad. On the middle string set. Of course, this is just scratching the surface, more of an overview of these options. So I'm not going into too much depth on all the various ways we could do those. You can go to the link in the description to get hold of the lesson materials for this and all my other lessons. For this one in particular, I'd say it would be extremely useful. I've written up 6 pages of these turnarounds, all the ones we're speaking about here and maybe a couple of extras. It's typed out neatly in Guitar Pro. I also provide the PDF files, and it's tab and notation. Okay, now let's get on to some more jazzy turnarounds. Most jazz turnarounds originate from a simple 1-6-2-5 progression. If we're in the key of C, that would be the 1, C, 6, A minor, 2, D minor, 5, G7. In all these examples we'll be doing 2 beats of each. There's a vast amount of options we now have with this sort of a progression. Something that people commonly do is they turn those minor chords dominant, sometimes one or sometimes both of them. Here's how it sounds with the A minor turned into an A7. And here's how it sounds if you turn both of those minors into dominants. A7, D7, G7. In the blues, typically you'll hear that. On that D7, I like to put the 3rd in the bass. Now let's make these a little more jazz specific. Let's take that C and make it a C major 7. We'll go back to having our A minor 7 as our 6. D minor 7 is the 2, G7 is the 5. Okay, what about turning the A minor 7 into an A dominant 7? D minor 7 could be D minor 9. G7, let's try G13 this time. All of those chords had the same top note. These are nice little games you can play, figure out how many ways you can possibly play these progressions, whether trying to incorporate some kind of a melody along the top line or keep a static note on top. Now the next thing we're going to do is sub the 1 for the 3. Again, we've spoken about this in some of the previous lessons. So in the key of C, your 3 chord is E minor. We're going to go with an E minor 7, A7, D minor 7, G7. So now instead of 1-6-2-5, we have 3-6-2-5. Okay, now let's take that and run with it. E minor 7 could be E minor 9 instead. A7, we can put an alteration on top perhaps, sharp 5. D minor 7 can become D minor 9 again. G7, put the sharp 5 on. Resolve to a C 6-9. This time we've created a chromatic rundown on the B string. Now what about trying to bring that top E string into some of these voicings? Let's go E minor 9 with the 5th up on top. A7 with not only a sharp 5 but a flat 9 now as well. D minor 9, and then a personal favourite, also a favourite of Johnny Smith, Barney Kessel, Jim Hall. A 13 with a flat 9 on top, so G13 flat 9. And again, you might resolve that to C 6-9, for example. So that would sound like this. getting dark in here. Is that better? Maybe a little bit. Alright, let's go for it. Now what about if we try and apply some tritone substitutions to these dominant chords? Again, I do have a specific lesson on that, so do check that out. So we'll keep our 3 chord, the E minor 9. Now the A7, first of all, picture this 3-note voicing and find the bass note a tritone above the current bass note. So that would be E flat. Always easy to find the tritone because if you're in standard tuning, it'll be a diagonal line. So A7 is going to become E flat 7. Notice how these 2 notes are shared in both chords. Now this opens the door to some interesting sounds. We could play E flat 9, D minor 9, D flat 9. You could resolve to the C6 9 again there. We could also use our spare finger to add a 13 to those voicings. We could go E minor 9, E flat 13, D minor 9, D flat 13. Resolve. Okay, what about if we make these even fancier? We can go E minor 7 here, E flat 7 here, D minor 11, and then flattening this portion of your chord, D flat 9 with a sharp 11 or a flat 5 on top. Resolving to the C6 9. That's a really pretty run of chords. And again, I've made the effort there just to keep the same note on top of all of them. That G on top each time. It's worth thinking about that stuff. Now what about finding these on another string set? Let's go back to 3-note voicings for a minute. If we're rooting our C major 7 off the E string, that would look like this. The A minor 7 off the A string, the D minor 7 on the E string, G7 on the A string. And again we can make that 6th chord a dominant instead of a minor. So now you'd have C major 7, A dominant 7, D minor 7 to G7. Now let's add some extensions to these. C major 7 will just add the 5th on the B string, but then A7, let's go flat 9, D minor 7, G7 flat 9. Now let's sub the 1 for the 3 again. Remember that in the key of C, 3 is E minor 7, so that's going to be our first chord, and then we play A7, we're going to go sharp 9 and flat 9, 1 beat of each. D minor 7, and then the same thing on the G7, sharp 9 and flat 9. So that's going to sound like this. Pretty sweet. Tea break. Pretty rock and roll. Mint tea. Getting a bit obsessed with this stuff. Pretty much fueled by this and coffee at the moment. Yeah. Now let's go ahead and apply some tritone substitution to that again. Think back to a moment ago when we figured out that A7 could be tritone subbed for the E flat 7. That of course is still the case, and this diagonal line kind of thinking still holds true. A7, this time it's a reverse diagonal. So let's say we're going to go E minor 11. Now all we need to do is keep the little finger and the first finger static and move these 2 down a semitone each. And you've got your E flat 7 3-note voicing with a flattened 5th or a sharp 11 on top. And then D minor 11, D flat 7 with a flat 5 or a sharp 11. I tend to call these flat 5s in these scenarios because there's no natural 5 anywhere else in the voicing. I don't know if that's actually the proper way of naming these things, but for me that makes the most sense. If I see a sharp 11 in a chord, I'll assume the 5th might be in there somewhere. Now what about changing the type of dominant? Let's go E minor 7, E flat 13, D minor 7, D flat 13. Resolves beautifully back to the C major 7. That's the same turnaround that Hank Garland uses at the start of his beautiful rendition of Polka Dots and Moonbeams in F. the bonus turnarounds. These ones are a little more complicated in that everything other than the 1 has been tritone substituted. People call this the Ladybird turnaround. For me, I think of this as something that Wes Montgomery almost defaulted to at times as his favourite turnaround. Let's go back to the key of C again. Take your 1, go up 3 frets. So E flat major 7. Again, that's a tritone sub for the A7 in some ways, if we think about it. The only thing that's odd this time is we've gone with a major 7 instead of a dominant 7. Then we think about what would have been next. You'd have had a D minor 7 next. The tritone of that is A flat. And again, we can go A flat major 7. And then we'd have had G7 next. Tritone of that would be C sharp or D flat, where again we're going to go major 7. Super pretty sounding. Let's try that with some other voicings. And then maybe a dominant. What about alternating major 7, dominant 7? So many beautiful ways to do it. Let's try it down here. I recommend spending some serious time trying to find all the ways you could ever imagine to play that stuff in every key. You want to have this stuff ready to go in your vocabulary so that when you're playing through standards you can just choose any one of your many turnaround options. Don't be the guy who only knows one way of doing it. Of course, this will also really inform your lead playing. You'll be thinking of these changes while you're carving out beautiful lead lines over turnarounds too. I'd also recommend really studying Barney Kessel's chord work and Joe Pass. Those two guys had a wealth of options when it came to turnarounds and this kind of vocabulary. A lot of what I learned from working out Barney's parts on the Julie London album. Incredible guitar playing on that whole record. It's really a lesson in how to accompany a singer. In fact, I might do a video on one of those pieces. Let me know down in the comments if that would be of interest. Okay guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found this illuminating. I think turnarounds are a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. Remember that these can be used as intros and outros as well, or you can just vamp on these for a while. Many things you can do with turnarounds. If you've enjoyed this lesson, please do hit the like button and drop a comment below. It really helps me to continue doing this stuff. And I'll see you next week for some more musical explorations. Take care.